Welcome back, everyone. We appreciate you joining us for a panel discussion titled Rethinking Interior Controls, Designing for a Post-EV Automotive Future. My name is Lori Mavis. I am an independent industry expert specializing in product management and strategy, in particular areas of innovation within vehicle and also complementary components to the vehicle, such as mobile and web. And I am honored to be joined on the stage today with two of my esteemed colleagues, Tony Sumcad and Derek Prentice. Welcome, guys. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Hey, great to be here, Lori. Great to be here.
Derek, do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for everybody for being here. Again, Derek Prentice. I've been in the automotive world 15 plus years from a product marketing standpoint and a product management standpoint, really focusing on the digital cabin. I've gone through a number of iterations with multiple OEMs that may include like Uconnect and Ford and Sync and Nissan, as well as the aftermarket side of things. So really looking forward today to our discussion and conversation on what's going on with this whole wacky and wide world of digital, the digital cabin.
Thank you. Tony.
Hi. Good afternoon, almost lunchtime to everybody here. I'm Tony Sumcad. I'm an automotive engineer. I am a specialist in vehicle connectivity with over 25 years experience. I have a number of patents, and talk to me about innovation and leadership, and it's an honor to be here.
Thank you, Tony. Well, this is quite the topic we're going to talk about today, right?
Here we go. Hey, Lori, an idea, real quick. I know in our audience, I just want to get a baseline of who's here. Yeah. So from an engineering and technical perspective, who's in the audience? Do we have the technical side of things? Okay, great. How about design? Designers, UX, okay, got that. All right, good mix. And how about anything else? Marketing, sales, okay. Innovation, product innovation. Okay, great.
Looks like we got a good mix.
We have a very good mix. Okay, this will work out well.
Yeah,
on that.
Fantastic.
And then how about from a veteran standpoint, we'll say, how about 10 years? Who's been in the industry 10 years plus? Good amount, yes, yeah, okay. And then get a better baseline of then who's not been in the industry. So 10 years and under, we got the rest. Perfect. Okay, cool. Well, that gives us a good starting point. Let's get going.
All right. Well, let's get this started. So, the thought that you and me and Tony talked about was how OEMs are innovating these days and the difference between traditional OEMs and the newer players and even players within other regions such as Asia that they're able to innovate and develop new operating systems and, work with that in under 30 months, whereas traditional OEMs can require more than 48 months. That's quite a shift. It's quite a change. And given how fast innovation and technology are moving, how does that impact the industry that's originally intended to go all EV and is now backing away from that strategy a bit? Not to eliminate EV entirely, but rethinking the strategy of how do we keep ICE vehicles in the mix, which for those of you that are not familiar with that term, that is, do you want to?
The internal combustion engine. Here we go. There's too many political things going on with ICE, so we're going to keep it on that.
Yeah, so we're going to keep it within automotive for that term today. All right, so we've got a few different areas that we can look at with this. So first of all, let's talk about strategic context. So with the EV feature focus and pricing influence on OEM and design, we've got two different buyers, two different visions, right? We've got fleet and we've got consumer. So, how do we think about that from a strategic perspective? What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll take this one first and we can talk a little bit more about it, but it's important to note that your target buyers of your vehicles are not necessarily just the end customer who really want very feature-rich, the latest technologies, the latest whistles and lights, sometimes literally with the lights on some of our newer vehicles here. The other population is really the commercial market, those fleet owners. They really want something that's more simple. The more that their vehicles are being rented, the less the more profitable their business will be. And usually that mirrors having more simple and easier to maintain vehicles. So it's a dichotomy of sorts.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as we go through and you kind of look at the three bullet points that we have there's always this continual internal friction from an OEM standpoint, right? You have product at the tip of the spear, then you have the UX and the engineering teams that are all working together cohesively, and then you have the implementation teams. Very much a friction between what can be done, what's the budget, what types of screen sizes, what's the experience. I mean, are we an entry-level vehicle? Are you to a high-end vehicle? What is the the source of the power, right? Between hybrid, ICE, and EV. So right now you're seeing this whole convergence, and it's messy. It is very messy right now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think from a strategic context too, if we look at the economy and where it's at as well, I think studies are showing economically the consumer buyer is starting to feel a lot of pain, and there's a bit of a strain as far as being able to buy newer vehicles right now and possibly for the foreseeable future. Research is showing that fleet customers will have the buying power through at least early 2027. And so I think from a strategic context, that can play a really big role with the OEMs and how they plan, what their designs are going to be and, what type of controls they would factor for with that moving forward. Because your fleet customer is going to be very different, right? They're not going to be focused on personalization and features. They're going to be focused on productivity and efficiency.
Yeah, absolutely. When we talked about being messy, right? As things are being pivoted and moved, I mean, 2027, 28, 29 model years are full in effect right now. So are the OEMs quick enough to pivot to make those changes, both interior design, screen design, and what the customer wants? So that's the big question, and it really comes down to which we're going to take you through.
Absolutely. I think we can get on to the next slide. We'll talk a little bit more detail on some of the distinguishing factors here too.
Yeah, that's great. So yeah, we can move on to customer experience. And so, on the note about personalization with the consumer and having a lot of features versus fleet, there's also the system complexity of things, right? Consumers, when they buy a vehicle, they often keep it for several years. And so, every time they go and they buy their next vehicle and it's newer, they do find quite a lot of changes within the screen and the features, which I think can be exciting and great, especially if it meets, what their expectations are with what they've purchased and what they want to do. But then there's also that learning curve. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's something kind of the to button or not to button. We'll call it that. A lot of screen, a lot of going to screen and screen fatigue and screen overwhelming and the UX, and like you had mentioned. So how do we continue to bring continuity to that? I know, Ford, Cadillac went through a lot in their early beginnings with the first Q system, the My Ford Touch, right? There was this great implementation. Everybody was going to smartphones and they wanted the screens, and then they took away a lot of the buttons. And then that caused a huge dilemma because then at one point in time, Ford actually was extending the warranty for customer complaints. It wasn't necessarily a reason not to buy, but there was frustrations in how the flow of that went. We're almost seeing that again, where huge shift, large screens, great real estate, but complexity where the HVAC controls are, the quick radio controls, heat, the seat heaters, all of those different things are coming into play, and it's like we really have to be cognizant of what is the customer really looking for? What do they want? Where are they telling the OEMs and the designers and what we're implementing to go? So I think we're at a very big crossroads of that.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great point because, with these new versions of operating systems, we are seeing a trend in, what they call screen fatigue, right? User fatigue, because, having to relearn that system and how it works, and then, of course, the different brands across the different OEMs. So if you maybe own a Ford, for example, but then you get in a rental vehicle and it's a Toyota, you're having to relearn and figure out how to use a very different, system. And so, yeah, I think it does add to that in a certain sense. Tony, do you have
And even to the brands, right? I mean, even to the brand, throughout the brand and the models, there's a lot of differentiation. So
There's also the familiarity. Are you an Android Auto? Are you an Apple CarPlay? Or do you go with the OEM who has done it in-house? And how do they work when you switch between the brands or even the vehicle lines themselves? So in the future, I predict that there's going to be some kind of convergence. But as we talked about in this bullet point, there is a complexity with having to learn two different things and just to get to the same outcome. And so that's something to keep in mind from a user experience standpoint.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And I think moving on to the second point about OS expansion, whether, do we call it innovation or, is it an obstacle to adoption? And then how do we balance the two?
definitely. Tony's a good one on this one. Let him run with it.
Yeah, I'll remove who the OEM was, but long ago when I had a minivan, and being in Southeast Michigan here, our winters are very strong. And it's very inconvenient if you have to navigate a touch screen to try to turn on your HVAC system and remove your gloves while you have 4 kids in the back that are screaming, "I'm freezing, Dad, hurry up and turn the heater on." So I think building with some sense of empathy in the future, where you have a balance between, I want to customize the touch screen with things that are unique for me and my situation, with having something that, irrespective of the situation, you can easily turn on, like turning on the heater, for example, in my case. Please keep that in mind with your designs moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's really a great point. I really love that you brought that up. And, I think for me too, my personal experience in this area, I have had a real passion for seeing what we can do from a product standpoint to design more simplicity, right? I think simplicity is king, making it easy for a user to get in, and even if they're using that radio for the very first time, being able to intuitively get in there and use their phone with it, or just figure out how to use the system quickly. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for that still, of being able to empower the customer or the user when they're getting into a vehicle and using that interior system for the very first time to quickly learn on their own. Because sometimes you're in a rental car, you need to learn, but sometimes even when you're making a purchase and you're at a dealership, there are some customers who they don't want to spend the extra time at the dealership being taught how to use a radio, and that's assuming that the sales team has been properly equipped and trained on how to do it, right? So I think there's a lot of opportunity for innovation there where you can keep moving the innovation forward, but to your point, keeping it human, doing it in a way that empowers and enables the user to quickly learn and get comfortable with what that new system is and what the innovation is that they've moved it to.
Absolutely, for sure.
Yeah. Now, when we look at the younger buyers, it's a real interesting mix with the younger buyers today, because it seems that, from a price point perspective, there are a lot of young buyers that they're still going for those older vehicles, but they want that system, they want the innovation, and so they're actually looking for aftermarket solutions that they can then install into their vehicle. Derek, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, interesting enough, right? We have a conversion. You have a younger generation that's come up that all they have is screens. They very well adapted to screens, whether Apple or Android and such. I'll show my age a little bit. Some of you in the audience, Crutchfield. Do y'all remember Crutchfield? And hey, I'm going to order my systems and all that and do that. I see some nods. And Mickey Shore, right? Mickey Shore in the local Detroit area, very big and upfitting of infotainment systems. I mean, it used to be these young kids would get this, the first thing they do on their used cars, get their new head unit put in, they put in their amp and their subs and bass and all of that. So now we have really, really good systems that are in these infotainment systems, like the speaker systems, the sound systems are quite good. So they're not hopping in the car and running down and having these upgrades done. So that's caused a huge ripple within the mobile electronics, but they still want to personalize. They still want that they have screens available. Obviously, we're working. We have to make sure safety is first at hand, so the hands-free, but the plugging in. But we're seeing some interesting dynamics. I'll give you a quick example. My son, who's 17, just got his first car. He went out of his way to get a late 90s Ranger. He loves his little Ranger that he's got. Super easy HVAC controls. It has a single DIN radio system. He didn't even know what the DIN was. I'm like, okay, I had to give him the whole scope of what that radio system is. He has an aux jack, plugs it into his iPhone, and he loves it. Like, he's very well situated. But out of his car, and we feel good because he's safe. He's not necessarily tinkering with it and all that, but as these cars come through and they come into play from a used car perspective, they're going to have these screens. How can we bring that personalization, that digital experience to them that they're looking for? So I think there is a great opportunity from an aftermarket perspective, but it might be cohesive with the OEM and maybe like the accessories group or things like that, where digital is the accessory now.
Yeah, that is fascinating. It's going to be interesting to see how that moves forward too, and how, as these younger buyers start to move up and evolve to the newer vehicles, what that'll look like for them. But I'm not going to digress on that. I think we should move on to the next topic, which is design.
And then the EVs are coming in too, right? So
yeah.
What's that EV world look like from them to be able to incorporate it?
EV and autonomous, although I know that that's not really a topic of discussion so much at the moment. I mean, it's still there in the background, but I think you're absolutely right, and it will be fascinating to see where it goes from there. So on the design implications, though, what is the path to intuitive and human-centered design? I think we've had some really great presentations already today from the design standpoint. I know we've got another great design presentation that's going to come up after us that will be able to, touch on some various aspects of that as well. But from your perspective, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'll take a crack at this. There's the two basic ones. It's the time. You can measure from the point I have a desire to make a change in my controls to the point where I have achieved it. So time is something that's easy to calculate and to measure. Second is the number of hops. How many screens do I have to go? How many sub-buttons? How accurate it is? So I think these are some basic HMI things that are measurable. And then the third thing is the basic pain scale. So the scale of 1 to 10, how easy was it? And probing your customers, whether it's a workshop or some kind of a market research study. Those kinds of things are easy enough to mock, especially leveraging AI, which we won't go into too much more, I promise. But coming up with some kind of a mock system to measure those three categories is something that two of those three are very easy to measure and accurate. The third one is more subjective, which plays to the art side from a both science and art standpoint for human-centered design.
Yeah, agree. I mean, right on what you were saying, I'll go back to that history lesson. Like, we've gone through this already one time from an OEM standpoint, jumping into very screen-centric, interactions. And people, the customers will pull back. They said, I want my dial and my quick button and my quick access and things like that. Now, I will say that what we're getting into with technology is customizable and personalizable buttons, which I find very fascinating, where, again, you can have hard buttons and create a personalized and very user-centric experience with those buttons and being able to personalize them. So I really see that could be a route where we can have screens and you can have the personalization still with physical switches and buttons and dials.
So that's an interesting point. And, with that type of functionality feature, I can see that being an amazing thing to have. And I can also see it being somewhere where maybe it could also cause potential issues with the screen fatigue and the cognitive overload.
Yep.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think you're absolutely right. You hit the other side of it, is that could induce more complexity, right? If somebody has to go, I have to read or go program these buttons and dials and switches and things like that. And you'll find out there's a lot of people and a lot of customers that have all of this customization and they do very little with it. They leave it at the factory settings. They may stumble across it. It might be from lack of knowledge of understanding what their vehicle is capable of, or it could just be lack of interest, and I like it the way the OEM set it up. So it's a dual-edged side of things of what is the customer looking for, what do they need, how do we educate them and keep them aware of what all of their of the vehicle's capabilities are.
Yeah, that's a great thought. What about OEMs and balancing innovative design? I know we kind of talked on that a little bit, but any other thoughts in regards to what we just kind of talked about earlier in the previous couple points?
Yeah, I think the previous topic that talked about looking into the future or interrogating the future, if I was saying that correctly, the best designs, I think, will have some reserve capacity built into it. So you have that capability to add features after the sale or even provision after the end of expected normal life. And what I mean by that is having something that is flexible enough and also balances that cost effectiveness. So you still have customization or capabilities to building things that we don't yet know about and deploy them accordingly as features in the future.
Yeah, that's a tricky one too, because a lot of that isn't just about designing the software, it's also about the hardware that's going to go into that, right? And, I know before automotive, became so rich with technology, wireless experienced this quite a bit, and it was always that cost, ratio balance of making sure that the hardware itself is going to have enough horsepower to accommodate for future innovation, not only just for, the radio that's currently out there, because when there are software updates that get, downloaded and you're trying to help these vehicles keep up with the times, but then also, for supply chain planning and management, because OEMs often buy, radios and systems, and they try their best to plan out, how much they need and how much they're going to use with vehicles. But then, if there's a reserve or if it's a particular system that they plan to use across multiple model years, that has always been a challenge. And I personally have watched more than one OEM really grapple with that, question and have a huge debate about, do we invest in better hardware to accommodate exactly your point, Tony, or, do we throttle back on that based on where we see the industry going and where we think, systems and innovation will head from there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I get that question often asked of me of like, well, why can't the vehicles keep up with how fast the phones and the laptops are and their processing speed? And I got to take a step back and say, well, listen, have you ever left your phone out in the sunshine on a blazing day and it does nothing, right? It shuts down, it says it's turned off, and cool it down. Well, that's one thing for a phone, but in system critical information in a vehicle, you have to have it turn on every time. And I have to tell everybody, like the testing that has to go through, the validation, all of those things from screens and processors and all of the chipsets that are in those, it takes time. And so that is an internal conflict that the OEMs deal with, right? They have all of the experience that the customer has on all of their other mobile electronics in their day-to-day. But the vehicle really has to be stable, safe, and turn on every time that it's 120 in Arizona or, minus 20 in the Upper Peninsula. So
yeah,
it's a tough struggle. But and then to make it longevity, that's even the harder thing.
Yeah. So how much do you invest in to plan for that innovative future, right? Yeah. Okay. Well, let's see. The last part that we were going to cover was on commercial versus consumer dynamics. And we did talk about this a bit in the beginning of our talk. But, I'm really curious to dig in a little bit more with both of you about, planning and designing and strategizing for efficiency for fleet versus premium. And in this case, premium would be consumer personalization. Where do we see that going right now in the near future? And then how could that relate to, the impact on EV versus ICE? Or will it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been fortunate to be involved in the commercial and the fleet side for about the last 4 years as well. Actually, more about 6. But we have this, again, a friction of what does the fleet manager, what does the fleet owner want of the vehicle, right? They're there to protect their asset. They need to make sure that their drivers are safe. They need to make sure that whatever cargo or whatever is secured and it's destination A, B, or C. And then you also have to cater to the driver, right? The driver has their needs, but you want to make sure that they're safe and not distracted. And then also what you had mentioned, the OEM, like how do they produce something that can be across the board from not only commercial and fleet and industrial, but also from the consumer side of things, that it could be flipped and make it very elegant, more rich in their experience. So right now there's a lot of that driving force of like, the fleet has the money. They are investing. They're buying hundreds or thousands of vehicles at a time and delivering it and catering it to the expectation of those fleet owners and fleet managers. But then also to be able to flip it quickly. So again, this is an area where screens can be utilized, and if it's done in the right way, where you can implement a really good UX and simplified UX and very driver safe centric fleet UX, but then also be able to change within the backgrounds and using the same hardware, a whole different presentation, a whole different experience. So I think there's some good opportunity there. It's just being touched on right now. I start to see it in some of the heavy truck side of things, or seem like the Super Duty side of things, or the HD trucks. But there's a lot of great opportunity for it.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit too. I know this is automotive interiors, but to talk data for just a second. The common element between fleets and the premium customers is they want their data now, and they want it to be accurate. And if anybody knows what the Kano curve is, if not, the gist of it is something that is innovative today in 2 years is not. So think of air conditioning in a car. If you don't have it, you're going to be upset as a customer. In the future, telematic data is going to be just like that. And in the case of EVs, you'll want to know if your battery is charged and you're going to be able to make it to your destination. Same thing with your fuel level in your ICE vehicle. The thing that you have to be careful about are things that should never happen, as in if you have an electric vehicle, your telematics display and your mobile device should not show that you have oil life low, because that doesn't exist in an EV. So data needs to be accurate, it needs to be now, and that's common across both fleet and premium consumers.
Yeah, that's such a great point. From your perspective, between both of your points in that, what do you think it means for brand continuity? So first of all, what is brand continuity for those out there who don't know what that means?
Great. That's a great question. I started to throw that together because brand continuity means a lot of different things, from interior, exterior, brands, marketing, all that perspective. But from our perspective, here's the quick definition I kind of threw together. It says, a unified and recognizable digital experience across vehicle interfaces and connected platforms. And this includes visual language, interaction patterns, tones, and the sensory side of things. So it was really, I kind of messed around like, okay, what does that really mean for brand continuity and all of that? And I'll give you a great example. So take the Mustang, which is a very strong heritage, long history, has its presence of what it is when you say, I drive a Mustang. And then most recently, the Mustang Mach-E was brought into the marketplace. So a lot of the visual cues, the design cues, the performance cues were there from an experience standpoint. However, very different, very divergent from an EV of what you do and how your experience within the Mach-E compared to the Mustang. So even though there's a lot of continuity of splash screens and the driving experience overall, the brand had quite a bit of divergence of how the EV experience is to the actual ICE and the Mustang in itself. So I think that's an area where we could see, and we're starting to see that more and more, where there's either a hybrid version of a model, or again, there's several OEMs that have EVs and the ICE vehicles as well. So the continuity really should play into effect of whether it's performance pages or how the dials and the gauges are done, some of the different feature sets and functionalities. So I think it's kind of messy right now. And especially as we start to get into more hybrid models, you're going to have a blend of what the EV experience should be, and then what also the combination, and then also when it switches over to gas or diesel or whatever it might be. So.
Yeah. And to be clear, when we're talking the brand too, I mean, there's multiple brands within OEM. So if we even take it up another level higher, I think that brand continuity really means just within that particular brand itself. So for example, if we look at General Motors, right, there's GMC, there's Hummer, there's Chevy, right? There's Buick, there's Cadillac. So when you're talking brand continuity, just to kind of elaborate more on your explanation, which was great, by the way, I think we're talking about within that brand itself. So if we look at Cadillac, for example, we're talking about, it doesn't matter what Cadillac vehicle you get in, whether it's EV, hybrid, or ICE. You can get in that any model of a Cadillac, and you should immediately recognize by its logo, its color schemes, the designs that are used, the way that the buttons are fashioned or designed, versus if you go and get into a Chevy truck,
right?
It should look consistent for Chevy.
Yeah. Absolutely. And a little shout out in the early teens of like the 2011s or so with FCA as part of Chrysler and Uconnect, they did a fabulous job when they rolled out the 8.4-inch screen. Hardware was used multiple times, and they were easily adapted for their UX. So Jeep had a different experience, but there was some common ground where the buttons were at, and what did they use? Dodge they added performance pages and SRT pages, but basic 8.4-inch continuity of the UX, they did a really good job with that. Build it once, use it many times, change the colors, change the splash screens, and so I think that's an area to get back to. Like that was very successful.
I agree with you. I really agree with you on that perspective. So those are such great points, and I know we're starting to wind down on time here, but to kind of bring it all back around from the beginning, I really want to come back to the original statement that we had about, the disruptor OEMs, and OEMs out in Asia, for example, as well as, we can look at some of the newer companies here in the U.S., where they're able to innovate and do a lot of this design work and newer operating system design work in, under 30 months, whereas traditional, more established OEMs, they can take, upwards of 48 months or longer. And so, I really loved the statement that you talked about earlier, Derek, about, the flexibility in design. I really think we're on the cusp of something here where, if you cannot be nimble in this way, it's going to be really difficult to get ahead, stay ahead, and continue winning. And especially with the economic factors that we've, all been experiencing and are taking to account. If you're unable to be flexible, for example, if fleet customers are king through early 2027, it would be really easy for OEMs to focus their strategy on building toward fleet customers, their needs, their preferences, and an investment standpoint more heavily than the consumer purchase, right? And so I think that flexibility and that being nimble is key, so that, things always shift. We always know things ebb and flow in automotive, and eventually it will change back again. And I really think that that's going to be the key in order to win in this climate that we're in now.
Totally agree. I mean, the Asian OEMs are moving quickly, as we saw. They're bringing out new and dynamic screens and HUDs and projection and even the capabilities of what they're offering. So we got to be able to move fast overall from an automotive standpoint and make things happen.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, it's been so great having both of you up here. I really appreciate being able to talk shop with you. This is always fun and interesting for me. We're really curious with the few minutes we have remaining. If anyone in the audience has a question they'd like to ask.
Well, first I have a question. So what do you mean by fleet? Do you mean like MHCVs or ride sharing?
That's a great question. So fleet is going to be any business customer that's going to order numerous vehicles of the same make and model and operating system and radio type within their vehicle to, accommodate whatever their particular business need is. And it's going to be different, right? So if you have a construction company, for example, if you've got a large construction company, they're going to need trucks, and they're going to need a software and a system in there that will have good navigation, for example, to get their, employees to this job site. Maybe they want software in there to be able to track mileage, track time, worked, things like that. But then also, rental car companies are another example of fleet, right? They do buy vehicles from companies to rent to customers, right? But that's a fleet. Those vehicles are their fleet. So when we're talking about that, we're talking about it at the highest level of it's a business customer that intends to purchase multiple vehicles for whatever their business purpose would be.
Thank you. And to build up on that, do you think that OEMs should make a new vehicle catered for the customers, like a new brand or a new model, or just have the same model with different characteristics for that customers?
That is such a great question, and I know that we touched on it kind of lightly with the talk because we could be up here for hours if we wanted to be to kind of talk about that. Do either of you have an opinion on that?
Again, that's a friction type area, right? Because part of when they go into a rental is getting exposure to vehicles which they can then go and purchase. The flip side is from the commercial side, right? They're building them for really a lot of specific needs, whether it's the heavy duty trucks or running vans and things like that. So it would be an interesting area if they came out with their own model or a particular brand that was specific to that. Do I think it could meet the needs? And if it was, really dialed in with the customer's needs like that, it probably could work. But I don't see the OEMs necessarily being able to do that or cater to that as a whole, just because of the way that the structure and the system is set up right now. I don't know, Tony, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it largely depends. There are OEMs now that have dedicated specializations for fleet customers, like the heavier duty typically are more commercialized. But it depends on the value of that. If the brand is such that I want to have that because I'm a fleet owner, then by all means keep it isolated and separate and distinct. If it is good enough to be also used by consumers, then there's no need to separate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question. Any other questions?
Hello. It's interesting you guys brought up the Chinese OEMs and Asian, just in general. They are coming up with a lot of really cool, innovative tech. On the domestic side, sometimes we're getting entrenched in our processes and needing to take a lot of time to develop things. Whereas on the Chinese side, it seems like they're maybe, at least appearance-wise, able to pivot more quickly or develop those innovative solutions quickly. What would your opinion be on being able to stay in line with some processes to make sure the quality is well enough and we have kind of those years of development, but being able to kind of pivot and come onto some of that tech quickly?
I think that's an excellent question and an excellent point. I can jump in, but if either of you have an opinion? Okay.
Well, I have our opinions.
We're good. We're full of opinions up here. We'll tell you that. So I guess I'll just start by saying that I think gets really to the heart of that. How do you win in this climate, right? In this atmosphere, and that is outstanding. I think for a while now, Automotive has said that's like the $1 million question, and how do we solve for that, particularly here in North America, right? And with the traditional OEMs. And, you know, they keep trying to figure out how they want to play this, right? We've heard them say, well, we're not a car company, we're a software company, right? But what does that mean at the end of the day? And I think, you know, some of the answer actually lies in part of your question. And I think that if they can figure out being nimble and flexible through their processes, right, and actually doing it, right, I think that they talk a good game, and then they talk about how they want to do things. Like, I've seen the OEMs try to go from a waterfall methodology to agile methodology, and then they try to adopt those processes. But you know, my honest observation, just as an independent, I can be up here and express my opinion, so I'm gonna, is, you know, if they could just stop getting in their own way and really embrace, you know, that being fluid, not having so many decision makers all the time as roadblocks or paperwork, you know, really setting it up to open up communication and clear up collaboration so that you can start to work in those ways. I think they have good groundwork and foundation work to start getting there, but you know, there's still those old culture and old ways of doing things sometimes that is not conducive to being nimble and flexible. And I think if they can get serious about that at the top levels and then move their way on down, you know, because all decisions start at the top, all influence starts at the top, and then it works its way down. I think that will go a long way toward helping them operate more like the you know, Asian markets and the U.S. disruptors, so that they can not only stay competitive but thrive.
Definitely, I would agree. To throw onto that, I mean, smart car, if you are implementing a smart car in a software-defined car, those are very bold statements. A smart car is a very bold statement because we've seen it. There's a lot of recalls, a lot of warranty issues that are going on with those, and it goes to Lori's stint that they have to get out of the mindset of building this vehicle as it was traditionally done. Get into the ebb and flow of how things can move quickly. Use the screens, some beautiful screens. The HD screens that are in there give a lot of flexibility, but keep the momentum. Let the UX and the design teams have the ebb and flow of what they need to do. Run with things, try it, get it out there, but then also have the ability to change them over quickly, right? I think Tesla's done a pretty good job at getting OTAs and getting things more defined, keeping their 12, 13, 14 model years up to date with their screens. So I think those are kind of the adaptation that needs to happen, and get really good at delivering a solid OTA or small nuggets of OTAs that can get out there, can make changes and pivot quickly.
That's such a great point. And I think we're going to go ahead and close on that because we are out of time. But again, thank you so much, Tony and Derek, for coming up here on stage with me and having this discussion. We appreciated having you here for the session. So thank you, everyone, for coming. We will be around all day. So if you have any other questions or you'd like to connect with us, please feel free to come by and say hello. But thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate it.